Marco Allegro has the Amanita muscaria. He thought that the Amanita muscaria was probably linked to psychedelic states and prehistoric. Oh, right?
Oh, he's such a salacious, wacky guy.
Was he?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, he was getting off on it. He loved it.
He would love getting off on freaking people out about...
freaking out Christians. I mean, that was you can't underestimate what he was saying. He was saying all of Christianity is a sex cult that worships a fungal phallus, and the semen of that phallus are the spores.
Yeah.
That all of Christianity is an ancient fertility cult. That's a big claim from a serious, Oxford-educated, Dead Sea Scroll scholar who was respected up until that point.
Yeah, who was also an ordained minister.
Yeah. I mean, there's a great book called Shroom that argues that this was all some kind of cynical attack on the Christian religion and that he didn't even believe it himself. The issue is that in order to carefully examine his claims, you need to speak, what is it, ancient Aramaic or something?
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm not in a position reading his book, which is all having to do with the etymology of these words, their origins in different languages. I just don't know enough about these ancient languages to make an informed assessment of his claims, but which is, I think, one reason that they've kind of hung around in this lore for such a long time, because it's hard for people to say with certainty if they're true or not, although I lean toward them probably not being well supported.
Big pause. Why is that? It just seems too wacky.
Yeah, because they're not. I haven't seen them integrated into any serious work since. Not that that's necessarily a good argument.
It would take a lot of education to be able to even understand whether or not that debate is cogent.
Right. Right, it's the same deal. I encounter this sometimes on like really fringe aspects of physics and chemistry, where someone will make some kind of wacky argument about the way atoms bond or something like that, and it's like it gets hard because you only have like a small handful of people that are capable of seriously evaluating the claims, able to weigh in, and then it doesn't really get vetted in a serious way. So things just linger around as maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But the bottom line is that most people don't get a valuable experience from these mushrooms, but some do. Some people have figured out how to make it work, and the experience is, again, it's its own thing. It's a GABAergic deliriant. It takes you into a dreamy, drunk zone.
Yeah, and it's in many ways a toxin, right? It's toxic in some forms.
Well, it contains another chemical, ibotenic acid, that is potentially very toxic, although it hasn't really been examined. In fact, it also contains a complex of this element vanadium that could potentially be toxic as well. So there are some legitimate toxicity concerns that I think anyone who's consuming it should be aware of. The ideal situation would be isolated muscimol, but it's hard to extract.
But yet it's connected in so much artwork and so much ancient depictions of, particularly of Christmas cards. There's always elves and these little Amanita muscaria caps.
Right. Well, drugs aside, you have to acknowledge that it's a spectacularly beautiful mushroom.
Yeah, amazing.
I've gone mushroom hunting all over the world, and there is no question that when you see that mushroom in habitat, that it's completely spectacular. There's nothing else like it. It is a magical experience just looking at it.
Yeah, I ran across it only once in Colorado in the woods, and it was amazing. It's like this it was a big one too. It was this big, beautiful red with white dots on it. It's like one of the most gorgeous things you could ever see growing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's legal, right? It's legal to possess.
Again, yes, it's legal because it's
not
not
really
that
do anything to
enjoyable for most people.
But is it possible that we just are doing it wrong, and that the information has been lost as to how to? Because a lot of people felt like it might have been a part of soma, which hasn't really been defined as to what soma is.
Right. Yeah, those debates are not really my cup of tea.
Right.
Because it's like just tons of guys pushing this or that argument without like a lot of evidence one way or the other, and so I don't know. And then there's people that argue that urine drinking is somehow required to concentrate the muscimol in one way or another. If you want to learn about it, I think the best way to do it is actually through this other related drug, gaboxetol, which was almost developed by Merck as a competitor for Ambien, and there's some high dose reports of gaboxetol that give you a much clearer example, and from my own experience as well, of what the potential of that class is. And it's very different. It's every bit as powerful as ayahuasca or something like that, but completely different. And it's hard to articulate. All these things are hard to articulate, but it's something that's been experienced by relatively few people, so that you don't even have this spiritual or metaphorical vocabulary for it. The way that I had it most powerfully was once I was doing a shoot for Vice on HBO, and they told me I had to go to Tokyo with less than 24 hours notice, and that I had to start filming as soon as the plane landed. Couldn't go to the hotel room, so I thought, all right, this is serious. No messing around, no time for jet lag. Like, I've got to fall asleep at 10 p.m. that night, wake up at 8 a.m. that morning. I've got to be awake all day, so I'm going to pharmacologically force this a little bit. I'm going to take a really high dose of this muscimol derivative at night to induce sleep, and I'll take Adderall during the day. That was the plan. So I took a high dose, I believe it was 45 milligrams, but don't quote me on that, of this muscimol derivative that's about the same potency. And at the equivalent of what would have been maybe 2 p.m. New York time, which I think was crucial, because these things are hypnotic. They induce sleep. So if you take it during the day, you're less likely to sleep through the whole experience. And it was unbelievable. I mean, I couldn't fathom the intensity of what I experienced. It was, just this rushing sense of becoming a passive observer in my own consciousness and seeing all of my thoughts produced by someone else that were racing at a speed that was so fast that I found it physically dizzying and had to lay down. And I felt as if the acceleration was pushing me toward an ultimate state that was sleep, and that sleep and death represented the ultimate state of consciousness. Whoa. So it was, and then, then I had to wake up at 8 and work the next day, and people say, how did you sleep? And it's like, well, I actually had this transformative existential trip accidentally. But
have you tried it since, just purposely?
A couple of times, yeah.
Did you ever recreate that kind of experience?
No, because it was a bit much, I would say, and I know people that have taken even more, and it turns into just your entire visual field transforming into rotating cubes, where each face of the cube represents a different aspect of your life, your future, your past, your present. Really dramatic stuff. So I think that potential exists with high dose muscimol. It's just hard for people to ingest it. Because of all the other material in the mushroom and the disgustingness of consuming it.
So is it possible that we've just much like people have sort of altered many different things like wheat and tomatoes and what have you, that at one point in time the mushroom was somehow different?
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the evolutionary chemical history of all these different plants is a fascinating subject that's pretty much lost to history. There's no archaeological alkaloid analysis that I'm aware of, but it would be so fascinating to know, because all of these natural products evolved just like the plants that contain them. What were the intermediate materials? What drugs have gone extinct? Did our ancestors drive certain psychoactive plants to extinction? There's a plant called silphium that some people have argued that may have happened with. It was a phenol derivative. Or like a fennel-related plant. But, yeah, I mean, it's really... And we've seen it with cannabis. The black market encouraged everyone to produce THC-dominant strains because it was the most potent, most stoning, most bang for your buck. Yeah. Now we have the ability to change the evolutionary direction of the plant and to encourage the production of CBN or CBG or THCV or CBD or whatever.
So, when you talk about a plant like the peyote cactus that grows so incredibly slow, and, if that became something that was highly sought after and very, very valuable, it could conceivably be wiped out.
Yes.
Yeah, especially something really slow. So there could have been substances like that were very geographically local, in a very small area, that are just gone.
Yeah, it's just a thought I just had, totally non-evidence-based, but wouldn't it be crazy
Oh,
if
shit.
the reason that a lot of these psychoactive plants that are present today tend to be less addictive is because all the addictive ones were harvested to extinction thousands of years ago, maybe. Something like that. I mean, these things do happen. I guess
we really wouldn't know. We really wouldn't have any way of knowing.
But
there's no fossilized plants, right?
Right. It certainly didn't happen with coca, which contains cocaine, or with cats, so it probably didn't happen that way. But, you just don't know.
Yeah, and I had read some theories that it's conceivable that the Amanita muscaria vary seasonably. So you have to figure out like when is the right time to harvest it, because there are some plants, although of course fungus isn't really a plant. It's kind of the opposite of a plant. The way it ingests oxygen, it takes in oxygen and breathes out carbon dioxide like an animal does. But that it's possible that these things vary seasonably, that you have to catch them within a window of time, and that they also vary geographically. Like some places they might be more potent, like Cuban cigars grown on specific land have a distinctly more more potent taste to them.
Oh yeah, absolutely, because the biosynthetic precursors for all of these natural products come from the soil typically, amino acids and things like that, and it's all going to change. There was an amazing experiment that was done where they started doping the substrate of psilocybin containing mushrooms with other tryptamines. So they used, instead of these DET and DIPT, put it in the substrate, and they found that the mushroom would take that completely synthetic chemical that does not occur in nature. It would then 4-hydroxylate the indole ring just like it were a psilocin derivative and create natural product derivatives of these synthetic materials, creating these semi-synthetic hybrids between man and mushroom creations.
Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is like why the synthetic natural dichotomy doesn't make sense. Everything's evolving. It's a constant interplay between human and plant and fungus. After we're all gone, all of our plastic bottles are going to be consumed by some bacterium that evolves to degrade all of these, polymers, and that will create natural products from them. And will those natural products be natural products because they were derived from a substrate that we created? It turns into like a very complicated issue, which is why I don't believe in the idea of natural and synthetic. Everything is simultaneously natural and simultaneously synthetic.
Well, everything comes from Earth.
Yes.
So even the most unnatural things that human beings have created are in a sense natural creations, like a bee creates a beehive. A beehive is a natural creation.
Right.
Yeah, it's a mind fuck. So to get back to Amanita muscaria, do you know of anyone who's effectively regularly used it as a psychedelic?
Yes, I've met, but not people wacky people.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah, not people where it's like, oh, that guy's a professor and he uses Amanita every night to go to sleep. He's doing really well. But yes, wacky people.
There's so much lore, again, attached to it, specifically because of the Christian, the books by Allegro were big, right? One of them was the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Christian Myth. That was one of his books, and that was the second book that he published after the Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. And I think he did that because they took the Sacred Mushroom and the Cross off the market, right? Like, didn't the Catholic Church buy out the rights for that, or was that a myth as well?
I can't remember.
There's something along those lines, but Jan Irvin republished it fairly recently with the blessings of the Allegro family. But the whole connection to Santa Claus and the whole connection to Christmas with that mushroom, there's so much attached to that mushroom. People want that mushroom to be Jesus. That's the one, that's the way. It's the prettiest. It's like it grows, it's got a mycorrhizal relationship with coniferous trees, so you find it underneath pine trees, just like the shiny presents underneath a Christmas tree. So people get so excited about that mushroom.
Yes, they do.
But yet no one gets off on it, except wacky people.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation. And, just because something's convenient isn't a good reason to say that it's the truth. Like, there are other psychoactive mushrooms that may have been used in the past. There are ones that we've discovered recently. There's a species called Rhodocolebia maculata. As far as I know, there's no information about humans consuming this mushroom, but it contains a salvinorin A type kappa opioid agonist. This could be a completely different type of psychedelic mushroom. No information on it exists. Maybe someone used it somewhere in the past. I don't know.
Whoa. Well, isn't there are some psychedelic substances that have been discovered that have no history of human use, like isn't Hawaiian baby woodrose, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Doesn't it have LSD-like properties but no history of human use?
That's a complicated question. Yeah, there's maybe not with Hawaiian baby woodrose, but with morning glory seeds, there does seem to be some Mesoamerican history, although it's not as well founded.
And morning glory seeds will put you on the moon, right?
Well, they contain LSA, and again, LSA is actually Albert Hoffman the inventor of LSD, did an experiment where he injected himself with small quantities of LSA, but there aren't many evaluations of the pure material. So the exact nature of the different components in those seeds remains a little bit mysterious as far as I'm concerned. Some people will suggest that it's the strongest naturally occurring psychedelic. Other people will say that it's not even psychedelic at all, that it's just a hypnotic. It just has a sort of sedating quality. I've used Hawaiian baby woodrose many, many years ago, and it's certainly psychoactive. Whether I'd call it classically psychedelic is a complicated issue. It's kind of like a dreamy, unpleasant delirium.
Any other ones that we could go over that are weird?
Watch my show. I think you'd really like it.
I'm sure I'd like it. I like all your stuff.
Okay. Because it goes into lots of weird stuff.
I just don't have enough time.
I know, I can't
imagine.
There's
too many things
that
are cool now.
Yeah.
It's one of the problems with Netflix and HBO and YouTube and just too much cool stuff.
Yeah. But this will be cool.
I will definitely watch it.
Okay.
That was 3 hours, man. It just flew by.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
We're in a time warp over here. So, listen, this was way better than the first time we did it. We were here. I think got a lot of cool information out, and I really appreciate you coming back, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's try to do this again, but not in 7 years. Quicker.
Yes, I hope
for sure. Thank you. And on Twitter and Instagram, it's Hamilton Morris. And your show is Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. It's is it available online? Can people watch it online?
Yes, it's on Hulu and streaming on Amazon and streaming on iTunes. And it's on Viceland as well. So,
beautiful.
Yeah, it's easy to find.
Thanks, man. That was awesome.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Thank you.
And if this is where the math is taking us, it's at least worthy of our attention to investigate it fully and possibly come to the conclusion that this is how reality actually behaves.
Jesus. That's the weirdest one. The weirdest one. It's like when people talk about intelligent life somewhere in the universe, that you are out there. Or a version of you or infinite versions of you.
Yeah, and it can be disturbing. Like, what do you mean by you?
Right.
If there are many of yous out there, each of whom has an equal claim on being you because they've had the same experiences, they have the same memories.
And maybe have made infinite variations in the decisions that you've made through your life.
That's right.
So you could meet a Brian Greene your age somewhere out there in the universe that's
made the right choices
when you or the wrong ones.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Become a gambling addict.
Yeah, you know, it's like that Star Trek episode where you've got like Spock and evil Spock. You know, the one that had the little beard on.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So there's going to be a little bearded version of me, a goatee out there.
Yeah.
So you know, and the thing I want to stress is this sounds kooky.
Yeah.
And the danger of kooky sounding ideas in physics is that there are people who then jump off for it and say, well, if that's possible, then this is possible. Maybe I can, with my mind, you know, affect what other people are, you know. So there's all sorts of crazy ideas that can be inspired by the weird insights of modern physics. And you've really got to keep straight what's real and what's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a problem, right? When people start using, especially if they're articulate, they start using scientific lingo to describe things that are very unscientific. It's sort of like what the bleep.
Yeah,
like
what
the bleep. Hey, look at you. But that was one of those movies where a lot of people, like, there was all this quantum talk, and you know, Dr. Quantum was in it with a little cartoon explaining particles and waves, and And you're like, there's science behind this, but then at the end of it, really, it was something that was created by someone who runs a cult, who believes they're channeling someone who's like 1,000-year-old alien, like that whole Ramtha thing.
Yeah, but let me tell you, if you have a moment.
Please.
So, a couple years ago, I was in the middle of a big project. In fact, I described this toward the end of the book, so you'll get to this little anecdote if you choose to carry on reading. I was in the middle of a big project, and a speaking opportunity came in, and I didn't properly vet it. You know, the money looked good and looked like a fine thing, and I signed off on it. And then a few days before I'm going, I realized it's to go to talk to Judy Zebra Knight, who channels Ramtha, the 35,000-year-old Lemurian sage. And I said to, you know, the folks who should have been checking in on this, like the lecture agent, I can't go. And they're like, hey, Brian, it's tomorrow. It's too late to back out. You know, it's like, Jesus Christ. You know, so I look at some videos online, and I see her on, like, the Merv Griffin show, where, you know, she channels Ramtha on live television. I don't know what year this was. You know, she snaps her head forward, it goes back. She changes her voice. It becomes like something between the Queen and Yoda. You know, it's this weird place. And she's, you know, hello, being. And she's talking to Merv Griffin, you know, and he's talking about like an airplane. She goes, what is airplane? You know, it's that kind of thing. Anyway, so I go, you know, and I show up, and the first thing I see is there are all these people walking around a grassy field with their arms out like this. And I'm like, can they see? And I get closer, they're all blindfolded. And I'm saying, like, what is going on here? And they describe that each person has a card around their neck where they've written down their life's dream. And an exact copy of that card has been put out on this big field. And they have to feel their way toward the matching card. And if they succeed, this shows that this goal or desire is going to come to pass.
Oh, boy.
You know, and I'm saying to those guys, like, so how's it going? He goes, like, really good. You know, one person found their card, you know, in the last few months. Like, you know, the odds of probability of that happening are kind of not unreasonable, but that's all that this is. And then they take me to the blindfolded archers.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. You know, so they're taking bow and arrow, and they're firing at these targets. And, like, man, I'm, like, standing way back on this kind of thing. And they asked me, you know, do you want to try it? And I was like, you know, there's a photographer that's come along. I'm like, no, I'll avoid that. And then they introduced me to this woman who is able to predict the next card in a shuffled deck. And, you know, so she'd pull out these cards and she'd say, okay, it's going to be a 7 of clubs. And it's like a 3 of spades. And then the next one is a 7 of diamonds. And she goes, oh, well, there's the 7 that I was talking about, you know, one card before. You know, so it's this crazy circumstance where, and then I go to give my talk, okay, because that's why I was there after all. This was just like the preamble. They were showing me what they do. I walk into this barn, and I cross the threshold of the barn, and they all give me a standing ovation. And I'm like, okay, appreciate it, but like, why are you giving me a standing ovation? And I go in, and I start to give my talk, and I say to them straight out, what I've seen here is nuts. Okay, you know, I say, you know, if you're going to try to predict next cards in the deck, you know, 1 out of every 4 times you'll get the suit. 1 out of every 13 times you'll get the rank. There's nothing in there but the pure probabilistic laws of mathematics, you know. They rise up and give me a standing ovation. And I say, it's appreciated, but why are you applauding? I'm telling you that you're wasting your time. And they applaud me again. And I'm like, this is like so totally weird. But then I go to the book signing, and I finish my talk at the book signing, and these people, they come over to me, and they talk real soft, and they say, there's a lot of crazy stuff that's happening in this place. But we come here because we feel that there's something else in the world, and we want to be around like-minded individuals that are searching for the deeper truth. So thank you for calling out the silliness that's happening here, but we'll come here anyway and spend our money because we want to be part of the journey. And I have to tell you, I had a degree of sympathy for them, because I get the motivation. I mean, as a physicist, what we do is we are revealing strange features of the world. So I get the urge, I get the desire. That the problem is that the methodology that's being employed is something that will never take you closer to the truth, however much you may feel that you're among like-minded individuals. So I get the motivation, I get the sensation, I get the urge, but it's tragic that these individuals feel that this kind of an undertaking is the pathway that will take them toward the deeper truth. And let me just finish up. So after this, they take me to the dinner. And the dinner's in a mansion at the top of the hill, and that's where Judy is. I'm probably going to get sued for this conversation, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know. But I've never spoken about this. Yeah, sure. Well, no, they're quite litigious.
Are they
but,
really?
Yeah. No, they definitely are. So anyway, this is just a one person's opinion. They take me to the mansion at the top of the hill, and that's where she is. She doesn't come down and actually participate in the talk. She's like watching it on closed circuit television up in the mansion.
Oh boy!
And I walk in, and she hugs me. But it was too goddamn long of a hug. You know what I'm saying? It was like, and she was like, "Thank you." It was like this big emotional thing, and I was like, I don't get it, but I think that's the way that she brings people into the fold and gets them to spend the big bucks to enter on this so-called journey toward truth, where she's, channeling this, made-up fictitious sage that somehow people buy into.
Is this all still going on?
It was just a couple of years ago, so I imagine it is.
Imagine if she's really channeling it.
Yeah.
We're just missing.
That's right. That would certainly rewrite every rule of reality, every law of physics that I understand.
Wouldn't that be less weird than the Big Bang itself?
No. I tell you why. See, when it comes to the Big Bang, I can sit down with the mathematics that I understand well, and I can follow the deductive chain of reasoning that gets us to some of these strange implications that we're talking about, multiple Big Bangs, other realities,
right,
and so forth. When it comes to channeling a 35,000-year-old sage, I don't know what the hell that even means.
Right.
I don't understand the physical processes by which that could possibly happen. I don't understand how there could have been a being of the sort that she's channeling alive 35,000 years ago, because it doesn't have any agreement with the archaeological record. So there's a vital distinction between weirdness that emerges from careful mathematical analysis and weirdness that emerges from an overworked imagination that possibly sees a business model whereby a lot of money can be brought in if you can get people to buy into your vision of how the world works.
Well, it's sort of like what they do is they curate ideas and then they run them through their sort of filter of woo-woo.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And then they distribute it in a very palatable way that attracts people. That movie,
yeah.
I tell a story, I've told this before, so I apologize to people who've heard it. There was a friend of mine at the Comedy Store had a friend that I don't know her name, but she came to the Comedy Store and she was so happy. And I'm like, she was like, I'm so happy. I go, why are you so happy? She goes, because I found the secret. And now that I know about the secret, I am going to be married. I am going to be this. I'm going to have this fulfilled life. I'm going to reach my dreams, and I'm really excited about that. So, at the time I had just seen the movie, and then I was just starting to understand the criticism of the movie. I was reading all these, accounts where scientists were breaking down all the things that were wrong, and I know I didn't dash her dreams. I just was like, wow, okay. And then I saw her a year later, outside of another one of my shows at a different comedy club, and I said, hey, how you doing? She's like, things are just not going the way I thought. I thought because of the secret that everything would be great, but my dad is still a pain in the ass, and now he's moved in with me, he doesn't have any money, and I can't establish a good relationship, and I don't have the job that I wanted, and I don't understand because I've been using the secret. I think about it every day.
Right.
And I said, here's my take on this. If you talk to someone who's very successful and you say to them, hey, how did you get very successful? And they say, I thought about it all the time. I have a vision board. I took that photo of the house that I wanted. I put it in the vision board. That became my house. I took, this idea. I want a beautiful wife. I want a family. I want sports cars and this and that. And now I have those things because the mind is a powerful tool and the mind can create reality. You're just talking to someone who is successful. How many people thought like that and nothing happened?
Right.
I bet millions.
Yeah.
I bet there's so many. You have a bias in successful users. Those are the ones you're talking to, and just because of the fact that they've been able to have these extraordinarily successful lives, while visualizing these things does not mean that visualizing these things creates an extraordinarily successful life. You have to think, and you have to act, and you have to do, and there's trial and error, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned. But if you wanted to simplify it at the end, once you're successful, and boil it down to a philosophy that you could sell a course on, that's what it would be.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Look, there's nothing wrong with visualizing success, but that is not the causal ingredient that will yield the success. And the thing that comes to mind is, I don't know if they do it any longer, but there was certainly a time when Olympic athletes would be taught to visualize, say, jumping over that high bar, and they'd run through the whole thing. But that's not all that they were doing. They were doing, 10 hours a day of training that integrated this visualization as part of the training program. So it's kind of tragic when people buy into these crazy ideas. And I have to tell you, when they were making that film, they called me to be in it. And I think it was the director or one of the producers I was on the phone with. And, they were describing what they were doing, and I probed sufficiently hard, and some of my friends did not probe sufficiently hard and were in the film and regretted it. But I probed sufficiently hard, and I've said, look, what you're doing to me sounds really dangerous. It sounds like a really bad thing to be doing. And they took offense in that call back then. A year after the film came out, it was either the director or producer, I can't remember the gentleman's name, called me up and said, I want to apologize to you. You were absolutely right. I have finally realized what a bad film this was to be involved in, and I completely regret it. So that, I don't think, is the point of view of the ROMP, the School of Enlightenment, which is behind this, or at least part of what was behind this, but at least the director or the producer, whoever it was, saw the light and realized that this is not the kind of information that you want to put out in the world, because it can change people's lives in a very negative way.
I think your comparison to Olympic athletes is very good, because the Olympic athletes are visualizing something that they already do. There's a great benefit in visualizing for athletics, for martial arts, for a lot of different things. Visualizing success, visualizing potential problems, failures of your process, how you're going to adjust on the fly. All those things are great, because then when things do take place in real life situations, you've already prepared for them. You know the path.
Jesus
That's
Christ.
what that's all about.
I agree with that. And in fact, I have to tell you, in one of the chapters, later chapters in the book, I describe theories about why it is that we, for instance, tell fictional stories. I mean, could there be any evolutionary value in two individuals telling each other a story that they both know is false, that they know has no connection to the world around them, but yet we've been doing that since the emergence of language? And there are these interesting evolutionary scenarios in which what you're saying is brought to bear in that unfamiliar context. We tell stories because it's the mind's way of rehearsing for the real world, but it's a way of rehearsing for the real world that's completely safe. So you can go on all sorts of crazy journeys to the underworld, up into the clouds. You can engage in all sorts of battles. You can fight gods or demigods. All these things can take place within your imagination, so you're completely safe. And yet when you encounter something that's analogous to the stories that you've been told or retold or embellished or told to others through other accounts, your brain is more attuned to respond in a beneficial way, because it's not as novel as it would have been had you not been engaged in this fictional account of telling stories. So there's value in visualizing. There's value in telling stories, but it's not the causal part that some individuals would want us to believe it is.
Yeah, the only thing that I would say contrary to that is some people develop expectations based on fictional accounts.
Yeah.
And this is a real problem, like romantic movies, where some people will expect the behavior that exists in these romantic movies only.
Right.
And it's not indicative of human beings in the real world.
Yeah. Point well taken. I mean, I think the vital thing is that your brain has had sufficient experience that it can weight these fictional accounts in a way that can enhance your response to the world, but not set undue expectations of things that are just, only going to be true in a fictional setting and not in the real world.
It's just so strange to me that we desire those. I mean, hero movies, right?
Yeah.
Like hero movies in particular, especially superhero movies.
Right.
Someone who possesses powers beyond anything known to human beings or any life form.
Yeah. I get that.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Sure,
way,
you would love to just snap your fingers and fix everything.
But I actually see it in a slightly different way, relevant to what we were talking about before. You know, I think that the whole hero worship that we have as a culture comes again from our recognition of how powerless we are against the forces of nature, against the inevitable death that is facing us all. And therefore, there's something deeply seductive about the possibility of a being that can transcend the limitations that we mere mortals are always subject to.
Yeah.
So I think it's built into our DNA to respond to the way that we do, in the manner that we do when encountering a hero in the world. I mean, there's, Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, I was just going to bring him up.
Yeah. In The Power of Myth, but his more technical version, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, he goes through the whole notion of what it is to have a myth, and it's basically an individual that's called to action to rise above the kinds of activities that mere mortals will be able to undertake, resist the call at first, but then rises to the challenge, goes out into the world, conquers, comes back a changed individual, and shakes up the reality from which that individual initially emerged on this journey. And there is ample evidence that across cultures, throughout the ages, we have constantly been telling these kinds of mythological tales because they speak to us. They speak to our urge and our desire to transcend the limitations that our physical form and the laws of physics necessarily constrain us to.
Yeah, it is fascinating when you think of how many different languages and how many different cultures share those same archetypal themes.
Yeah. And I do think it all comes, if you look way back into the history of the ideas, it comes from this initial recognition that we are mortal. And the fact that our brains are able to not just fix on the moment, but can think about the entire timeline is the one that makes that a poignant realization. I mean, if we couldn't think about the future, what would it matter if we knew that we were going to die? I mean, it would mean nothing.
Right.
But the fact that we can innovate and the fact that we have ingenuity that allows us to, make the wheel, that allows us to build the pyramids, that allows us to come up with quantum mechanics and Einstein's equations and Beethoven's symphony and Picasso's work. The fact that we can undertake all of these expressions of creative will and the desire to transcend the world around us has a downside. And the downside is we recognize that we are not going to be here for very long. And I think that motivates a certain kind of engagement with the world. And hero worship is part of it.
Kurzweil is a fascinating character.
Yeah, he thinks he's going to be around forever.
Yeah, that's why I was bringing him up.
Yeah.
Have you discussed any of this stuff with him?
I don't know him personally. I have certainly gone to some of his talks, and I think he and I had one exchange at some point in the past. And I totally get where he's coming from. He feels that we're perhaps the final mortal generation, and how sad it is. After, 100,000 generations of humans, if we could only stick around for one more generation, science would come to a point where we would be immortal. And that feels like a tragic state of affairs. I don't think he's right, and I think most people who think about this deeply don't think he's right either. However many vitamins you take and however much science is progressing, the notion that we are just a generation or two from immortality, I think, is wishful thinking.
This is a strange concept of immortality, too, because it's not necessarily you. It's a downloaded version of you that will exist in some sort of a computer.
Right.
Which is, what does that mean?
Right.
That sounds like hell.
Yeah. It could be.
Yeah. How's REM sleep in that computer?
Well, I allow for the possibility that maybe it would be a way of being in the world that would have upsides that are hard for us as flesh and blood individuals to appreciate at this point. But it raises the deep question, would that be a good thing? In fact, if you had that opportunity to be downloaded in some form And that would allow you to hold on to all your memories, build new memories on top of them, have experiences. Maybe there's an avatar that you're able to drive but through, your mental machinations is out there in the world. Would you do it?
I might have said yes before I've had some pretty profound psychedelic experiences. And then from then I've said, I'm going to hedge my bets. I'm going to see what's next.
Right.
I'm going to see what happens when the lights go out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you think there may be something that happens when the lights go out?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure, your body's going to decay and you are going to become a part of the earth. You're becoming part, unless they cremate you or unless they embalm you with some toxic chemicals, and then nothing can use your dead tissue, which is really a shame.
Yeah.
It's really a shame that we do that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, unless someone murders you and you have to exhume you in the past to solve, in the future, rather to solve a murder.
Right.
But I don't know what do you think consciousness is? Do you think consciousness is clearly just a factor of brain tissue and energy? Or do you think it's possible that what our brain is something that tunes into consciousness?
Yeah. Well, I've spent some time thinking about this question. I think it's perhaps the deepest question that faces science or even humanity at some level. And my own personal perspective is that consciousness is nothing more than the choreographed motion of particles in various quantum states inside a gloppy gray structure that sits inside this thing that we call a head. Do I have any proof for that? No. Does anybody have any proof for what consciousness is? Not at all at this moment. But the history of the reductionist program, where we've been able to take some of the more spectacular creations that have emerged in the world and recognize that they are nothing but the product of their ingredients and the laws of physics, leads me to extrapolate that idea to the experience of consciousness. Now, having said that, there's a deep puzzle. It's called the hard problem of consciousness, which is, if electrons and quarks and particles and laws of physics are all that there is, and if you buy into the fact that electrons don't have an inner world, that quarks don't have an inner world, how can it be that by taking a collection of those particles, you can turn on the lights? How can a collection of mindless, thoughtless particles somehow yield mindful experience? And that's a deep question that science has not yet answered. My own feeling is when we understand the brain better, that question will evaporate. We'll look at the brain with our newfound understanding, maybe it's 100 years in the making, maybe 1,000 years in the making, and we'll say, aha, when electrons and quarks and protons move in this particular configuration, one of the byproducts is an inner sensation that we call conscious experience. And that, to me, is the likely answer that we will find. But there are some very smart, well-respected people who go in a very different direction. There are some who say electrons and protons and quarks, they do have a fundamental proto-conscious quality. They themselves are conscious beings of a sort. Now, it's not like you're going to have electrons that are crying or quarks that are anguishing, but if you have a little proto-element of conscious experience that is imbued into a particle, and then you take a lot of the particles and put them together, the idea is that yields the manifest conscious experience that we're familiar with. I don't buy into that, but there are people who do.
Why do you pick a position?
Well, I take a position on this because I guess my view is you look out at the world, and what you do as a physicist is you move the smallest degree required to explain the phenomena that you are observing. And to move from our current understanding of the world to leapfrog to a place where electrons are conscious and quarks are conscious, to me is such a fantastically radical move that I don't consider it justified to make that move with our current level of understanding. There was a time back in the 1800s when life itself was so mystical that people basically said the same kind of thing. How could a collection of lifeless particles ever come together and yield a living being? They said that they can't. You have to induce a life force. You have to inject you have to inject a life force, and that's what sparks the emergence of life on lifeless particles. I don't think any serious scientist thinks that today. I think most serious scientists say, yes, life is wonderful. Life is, in some sense, miraculous. But life is nothing but the particles of nature coming together to yield the complex molecules of DNA and RNA, the complex cellular structures. The cells come together to yield the more complex multicellular organisms, and that's all that it takes to have something that's alive. No life force is necessary. That way of thinking about the world has gone away. And my own feeling is that that kind of progression is going to happen for consciousness. Today it's utterly mysterious. How it is that I have this inner voice talking inside my head. How it is that I look around the world and I can see the color red and I can experience the color red. I don't just have sensors that can call that red. I mean, an iPhone can do that. I actually have an inner world where I feel that color red. Where does that come from? Hard to answer that question, but I think 100 or 1,000 years from now, we'll look back and smile at how we in this era invested consciousness with such mystical quality, when in the end it's nothing but particles and the laws of physics, and that's all there is to it.
Well, what's interesting too to me is that as a human being, my thoughts on consciousness are very deep and profound.